Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF, and Hebrew name is Bitronistim. IDSF is a leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security to defend Israel. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Danny Seaman. Danny, thank you so much for joining the briefing.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Danny, you've worn many hats here in Israel as the former IDF spokesperson, the director of the government press office. You are a man in the know, and you have something to share, right? Right now, here in Israel and abroad, everyone is talking about Syria, Syria, Syria. And one thing I've learned from you in many of our conversations is that the media is not always pointing you in the right direction. And sometimes there is a story, there is a truth out there that you're just not going to get when you look at the headlines. And you have a story that very few people know and less people are talking about with regards to Lebanon. What can you share with us?
Well, I have a show here in Israel on Galei Israel Radio on Thursday. So I do some research and try to get information on what's going on. So I talk to different people in the know, try to get them on the show sometimes, but also to give me ideas of what to discuss. And I was talking to people that were given information. I can't elaborate on who these people are. But they were very clear that in the recent weeks, what led up, and I know from the briefings that were given by the IDSF this week, what led to the situation in Syria was basically the ceasefire that was achieved. And some people thought that Israel was, or Netanyahu had his hands twisted. And there was a lot of criticism in Israel by the media, by people in the politics against Netanyahu for doing this. And this contact, who's a very prominent Israeli journalist, he said to me that from what he understood, that Netanyahu did not have to be, Netanyahu realized or understood from wherever he got that information, it did not come from our military, by the way, that if things settled down or are quieted in Lebanon, there'll be dramatic things happening and taking place in Syria, as we saw immediately afterwards. Like within less than a week, there was a whole change in what was happening there in Syria. And this person says that the people around Netanyahu, who he spoke to, were very clear that the prime minister knew exactly what he was doing. And he estimates that this information was not brought to the prime minister, but the prime minister understood it from the Americans, who are very much involved also in what is happening in Syria. So that was the interesting item. I couldn't back it up from other sources, but I have to say that it's like the only thing that makes sense in the process that led up to it, because it didn't really make sense why Israel would suddenly put a stop to things there, because obviously the situation and what has happened in Syria helps Israel on many different levels. I think these things were brought to the attention of the viewers here from previous briefings on the IDSF. And the two major things is, first off, cutting off the support from Iran to the Hezbollah coming through Syria, and also taking out anything that the Syrians can do and their involvement in the Iranian plan against Israel. Before we go on, I would just like to mention that besides all these big things that are happening, today on the mundane and the usual, unfortunately, there was last night a terrorist attack here in Israel against a civilian bus coming from Beitar Illit through Bethlehem to Jerusalem, a road, by the way, that I travel often when I go to Ashkelon. And a terrorist shot at the bus of civilians, injuring 3 and murdering a 10-year-old boy, Yoshua Aron Tuvia Simcha, Zichrono Livracha, V'Hashem Yikom Damo, who was murdered by this terrorist, a member of Hamas, who had been in prison in Israel. He tried to surrender to the Palestinian Authority, who refused to accept him. Eventually, he turned himself in to the Israeli forces. So here we continue with these things, and all those who are talking about intifada and resistance, etc., Since when does resistance is justified with the murder of a 10-year-old child? And this is exactly what Israel is fighting against.
It's so horrible that a young boy should die like that on a road that we take all the time, no less from a Hamas terrorist released from Israeli prisons. And now in the headlines, is Israel contemplating another deal which would facilitate the release of more prisoners? But so Danny, let me ask you a question. When the Lebanon deal was being discussed, so many people were up in arms. How can Israel enter a deal with Hezbollah and Lebanon when so many advances are being made? And now you're sharing with us a postscript to that story, which had people known ahead of time, and obviously we're not prophets, it would have shed a completely different light on the Lebanon deal. Do you think it's possible to look at a prisoner deal with Hamas in that same light, that it's hard to stomach, but potentially there really is a deep strategy behind this that will save lives?
Well, it's hard to say. I haven't been on here for a while because I was on a tour in the United States. So it's an opportunity for me to say thank you to your viewers of the IDSF in the Springfield, Massachusetts area, the Newton area, Manhattan, who I had the fortune of being there, and I'm sure they're listening into this program today. And one of the things I said to them in the speeches there was that there were a lot of questions about Netanyahu and the government of Israel, or why are they not doing what seems to be to all these experts in the media and to the average public in Israel? Why does it not seem obvious to the prime minister? And one of the things that I came to the conclusion was that, and I mentioned in these speeches and also on my radio show, is that there's a lot of information that we don't know about, and it's good that we don't know about this, because there was action going on. We found out after we entered Lebanon, the IDF was operating in Lebanon very extensively for months and weeks before we moved in officially. It's amazing in this time and day that the government and the prime minister are still capable of keeping some things away from the media, because exposure of these things. And by the way, one of the things I've heard here in Israel media was that this beeper operation that is attributed to Israel, but apparently it was leaked by an Israeli journalist that something major is going to happen, and it made it necessary because of something that had happened with the Hezbollah a few days earlier. And he revealed this, and it made it necessary for Israel to operate. So in this case, it turned out to be fortunate, and it didn't disrupt and didn't undermine the ability of Israel to take these actions. So I mention all of this for us to understand that even in the case of Syria, if the prime minister knew, had the Syrians or the Syrian government or the Iranians for that matter understood that Israel, or not Israel, but that those elements inside of Syria are going to have an uprising against the government there, they would have taken action in advance. They would have been able to, I don't know to what extent, because the biggest damage caused to the Iranian abilities is what Israel did to Hezbollah in the last few months. So all of these things together, the fact that there's so much happening that we don't know about is fortunate. And that's the way that you're able to be successful, as we have been, and we have been tremendously successful in the past, maybe not a year ago, but in the recent months. Israel's full capabilities have come to the forefront, and it's making it very clear to these Syrian elements, and I'm sure this was brought up in the briefings before this week, that these Syrian elements, who for over 10 years could not overthrow the government there because of Hezbollah, they saw how quickly Israel took out the Hezbollah, and therefore they're going to be very cautious, and especially now when we took away every strategic ability that they could have had within Syria, with very systematically in the past few days, Israel removed any strategic abilities that they may have had. So now they have to focus on controlling Syria themselves and not deal with Israel and not mess with Israel.
Danny, you mentioned that you were in the States on a speaking tour. So just a note to all of our wonderful viewers of this briefing, all of our supporters of IDSF. We have regularly speakers and experts from IDSF traveling abroad. So if you're hearing this briefing, you're saying, wow, I want one of you guys to come to my town, my city, my community, send me a message, reach out, and we will absolutely see what we can do to make that happen. Now, Danny, just like the world is talking about Syria, and you're saying, well, wait, let's look at Lebanon for a second. So there's another country that I think you have something to share.
Yeah, this again in the preparing for my show this morning, I had an historian on, Michael Maimon, who I know for many years, and he's a Middle East expert. And we were looking, I wanted to bring to the listeners here in Israel some historical perspective and some of the background of what is happening, because it's happening so fast, and things are so really, there are tectonic things going on right now. There's been a major change, for example, in baseball in the United States, in New York, when the Mets signed Soto took him away from the Yankees. This is tectonic. This is beyond anything that's happened in baseball for many years. This is changing the way baseball is being seen in New York. But if we want to be serious for a moment, they're really serious. It's happening so fast right now here in the Middle East that it's sometimes hard to understand and perceive the extent of it. The experts that you had on this week were mentioning the fact that this is really a change of what happened in the past 100 years here in the Middle East. Since the Sykes-Picot agreement that sort of carved up, this was with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And this is what this historian spoke about today, mentioning the fact that while we're focusing and concentrating on what the Sunni and the Shia are doing in Syria at the moment, there's a whole other element happening here at the moment. And that is the Ottoman Empire, which in effect is now Turkey. The empire no longer exists. It fell after the First World War. But Erdogan from Turkey, the president of Turkey, has said that he wants to restore Turkey to its peak of being of what it was at the Ottoman Empire, leading the Islamic world. So while we're focusing or concerned about what may happen with these very extreme pro-ISIS organizations, Sunni organizations in Syria and their battle with the Shia, Turkey is trying to reestablish itself in the Muslim world. Now, I stress this because they're not Arab. The Turks are Turks, just like the Iranians. They're Persians first and foremost, regardless of whether they're Sunni or Shia Muslims. They're Persians. And the Arabs themselves are not happy with either the Persians or the Turks controlling them or maneuvering them or manipulating them. So what you see happening right now is Turkey was very much involved in what is going on in Syria at the moment for their own purposes, which they've made very clear and they've stated. And what this historian brought to the attention of the listeners here in Israel this morning was that Turkey has also signed some kind of agreement or reached out to Egypt. And we also know that Egypt has been in clear violation of the Camp David Accords with Israel. And I mention this because we have to understand that the United States was the guarantor of the Camp David Accords with Egypt. And if Egypt is violating it now and are building up forces in the Sinai, for what purpose? So the United States has to take responsibility. The failure of the international community to stand behind its commitments to Israel, that goes for Lebanon and 1701, the UN resolution there. While everybody knows very quickly to criticize the state of Israel, they do not take responsibility for their own commitments, which led to the deterioration of the situation in Lebanon and in Gaza, etc. The same thing is happening now with Egypt in the Sinai. So it's one thing, there are two ways of preventing escalation in the future. One is a very strong, determined, clear Israel that will no longer tolerate one missile, like governments in Israel promised in the past and ignored that promise. And it led to the deterioration, which finally brought about the 7th of October. and also the international community, and here first and foremost the United States, which first has to inform the Egyptians that it will not longer accept its violations and its transgressions of the agreement in the Sinai, but also to Turkey, who are a member of NATO and have built in the military which is beyond its connections to NATO, that it is totally unacceptable that they will be involved in anything happening in Syria, and that the Syrians have to be the ones doing what they want to do to rid themselves of the dictatorship that they finally were able to get rid of after 50 years.
Danny, if Turkey wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, extend the caliphate across the Middle East, is that good or bad for Israel? Meaning, to a certain extent, if they want to expand into Israel, that is bad. But if they want to take on the rest of the Sunni world, maybe that keeps the conflict away from our borders.
Well, this again, the historian who spoke on my show this morning, he also referred to this fact that you have the major battle in Islam is between the Sunni and the Shia. That's beyond any other thing. Of course, they want to force the non-believers, the Christians and the Jews to, if not convert, at least be subservient to Islam. But their first battle is among themselves for superiority. But one of the ways of establishing that superiority is diverting attention to their battle against Israel. So regardless of who takes control, one of the ways for them to establish their strength is by taking on Israel. Now, current history, and I'm talking about the last year, has proven now to all these elements, whether it's the Hamas, the Hezbollah, the Syrians, and the Iranians, and soon to be the Houthis in the Yemen as well, that they went one step too far with Israel, and now we're eliminating them. And if any one of these other forces want to do the same thing, we're not in the 6th of October 2023 anymore. Israel has crossed that line. The public in Israel will no longer accept any government of Israel not standing up immediately to any attempt to attack our country and our civilians. So that world is, and if they don't understand that, they'll pay a very severe price. They have to look at two things. There is nothing remaining of the Syrian military. There is nothing remaining of the Hezbollah abilities, and very soon there'll be nothing remaining of the Iranian abilities either. And I say this without even a shadow of a doubt. Israel, to end this war, will eventually have to take on Iran within the next few months, before the next administration, with the advent of the next administration. But within the next few months, Israel will address the greatest threat to its security, which is Iran. Iran, which by now has been stripped of all its abilities. And now we have to take out the last remaining ability that they are working very quick towards, is nuclear capability.
And I'm so glad you said that, because no one should look at what's happening in Lebanon and Syria and Turkey and think that is the new focus of this war, because absolutely it's a piece of the puzzle, but the focus obviously must be Iran. Danny, what can you share with us about the general sentiment amongst Israelis, whether it's being expressed in the media or just as you walk the streets of Jerusalem, in terms of understanding that we still have a major war ahead of us with Iran?
I don't think it's a major war ahead of us. I think that the major elements of this war, and I'm not a military expert, but I'm just making the assessment based on what we've seen and what we've been concerned about for many years. For many years, maybe mistakenly, there were elements in the Israeli military who brought to the attention of the public here and to the governments of Israel that Hamas is too strong to take on, meaning the damage that will be caused to Israel is not worth going to battle with them, which brought upon us the 7th of October, unfortunately, and nothing compares to that in the history of the state of Israel. We were also concerned with the abilities of Hezbollah, certainly the Iranian abilities. If Israelis were concerned after the literal slap in the face that we took on October 7th I think, and the concern that we had because of a lot of the elements here were constantly criticizing the government, constantly trying to weaken the resolve, constantly giving in to pressures from the American administration that wanted to restrain us, that wanted to maintain and continue with this fact that Israel is held back, the international community. There were those who thought it's not a good idea to anger the international community. Well, I don't see the international community, and this, what I'm expressing now, is the feelings of many and a majority of Israelis. You don't get this in the international media coverage because most of it is based on coverage coming out of Haaretz newspaper, which is extreme left-wing and even anti-Israel to a degree. And you have to understand that the public in Israel for years have told the government, finish the job. We didn't do it. We paid a price. We're no longer willing to pay that price. So what this means now is, and what we saw over the past few months when the government refused to listen to these experts and insisted that the military do its duty as the government requested to do, meaning go in and take over totally the control of the Gaza Strip and soon to take over administrative control, which will happen as well. And then also move into Lebanon and also do attack Iran, which we did. We have taken out these abilities in ways that are unimaginable. People couldn't imagine these abilities. And we still haven't revealed, I would say, a very large percentage of what our real abilities are. Part of my visit to the United States, I met with American military experts and security experts, both academic and people in the US military. And they are all completely astounded by what Israel has done in this war. They can't wait for this to be over so they can sit with the Israelis and study what was done by the Israeli military in Lebanon, also its battle against Hamas in Gaza. The abilities that we showed there, but also taking out the threat by Hezbollah, which many people thought was impossible to do. I mentioned the fact that the beeper procedure before. Somebody ran it through AI, artificial intelligence, and asked them, what is the percentage? How can this be, could this be successful? What are the percentages of something like this being done and succeeding? And it said it was impossible. AI estimated and said something like this is totally impossible happening. So we, or whoever did it, because again, I do not know that we did it. Israel is not officially taking responsibility. But you have to assume that who has an issue with the Hezbollah and can pull off something like that, and Israel is the only one that comes to mind, maybe not to AI, but to any of us listening here and watching this program. So we all know the capabilities of Israel. So Israel has shown a magnitude of abilities that everyone in the Arab world should be watching. And I think that the Iranians today are very concerned that not only that Israel will take out their nuclear abilities or strike back, but what happened in Syria is what's standing before their eyes right now, is what may end up, and we can all just hope for that. And I go back again to the international community as we're exposing right now what has gone on in Syria in the past 50 years, the violation of human rights. I'm not even talking right now what is happening today in the Sudan, what is happening in Iraq, what is happening in Nigeria against Christians. They're not saying a word about these things because it's not involving Jews. But in Iran, we also know of the civil rights violations going on there, and nobody is putting pressure on the Iranian government. They're all trying to restrain Israel. Well, we've had enough of being restrained. The restraint is costing the lives of our civilians, our children. We're not going to tolerate that anymore. And if you have a problem, put an end to the violence on the Islamic side.
Danny, thank you for that strong message. I'm so happy you were able to join the briefing today. It's been too long. I hope you'll come back again in the immediate future. I do know that our viewers love hearing from you and hearing your passion and your perspective on this war. So thank you. And of course, thank you to all of our viewers and all of our supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you next week, Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.